Hey everybody, this is Mr. Mop coming at you with another APGov video. Today we are taking a look at topic 5.12, the media. Now when we talk about the media, it is commonly, defined as a linkage institution. And once again, don't forget what that means. A linkage institution, once again, is something that connects the people to the government, just like political parties and just like interest groups. Now, the connection between the public and the government via the media as a linkage institution has led many in political science to define media or describe media as the quote-unquote fourth branch of government because of its profound effect. Even though it is not, in the Constitution per se, it does have a profound effect. And the origins of the power and the significance of the media in terms of being that connection to the public, in many respects starts with the John Peter Zenger trial. You probably never heard of this guy, but John Peter Zenger was someone that had been an immigrant to the United States, or an immigrant to the New York colony from Germany, from one of the German republics, and he quickly becomes a newspaper printer. And in 1733, following the arrival of the new colonial governor of New York, a guy named William Cosby, Zenger is going to start to publish a series of critical articles against the New York governor. And a lot of it's centered on the idea that the governor was trying to manipulate the various branches of government in the New York colony, most especially replacing the Chief Justice of the colony with someone that would be described as kind of a party loyalist to him. Well, these articles that were continuously critical of the governor would spur the governor to charge Mr. Zenger with seditious libel, which was a criminal offense. And when this case goes to trial, the jury is going to do something pretty remarkable. The jury is going to find Mr. Zenger not guilty. And the basis for it being is that the information that was presented as factual was in fact true. And therefore, being, defamatory in terms of, yes, trying to make somebody look bad, and yes, being malicious about it, is protected. It was not criminal as long as the information that was being presented was factually accurate. Now, this is going to be a very important foundation for what is going to go on to become, the explicitly constitutionally protected right under the First Amendment to, freedom of the press. So this is going to be kind of laying that foundation that, a free press, a press that is able to express itself, to be a watchdog of the government, is an important aspect of a functioning democracy. And, when we talk about the media as a linkage institution, think about how that, is manifested. The media is going to, be able to connect to the government in terms of interviewing and being able to question government and be able to try to, get them to explain why they're doing what they're doing or question what they are doing. Because the media, in many respects, represents the people. And they have that connection to the government that we, the public, generally don't have. Conversely, the media is important for the government to be able to promote their policies, to try to hopefully promote their policies in a favorable light, to have the public understand what the government is doing and why it's doing it. So, when we talk about the media as a linkage institution, it really is a two-way street in terms of providing things that the government needs from the public and things that the public needs from the government. So it is really a critical connection point. Now, of course, when we talk about the media in our nation's history, we really first start with newspapers. And, these early newspapers that are going to be created during the early republic are going to be renowned for being extremely partisan. Now, I know a lot of folks today, when they think of the media, They think of the media as biased and, clearly leaning one way or the other ideologically. Well, that's about as American as baseball and apple pie, because that's how it starts right off the bats. These were extremely partisan. Many of these are just straight up owned, for example, by, Thomas Jefferson. And they generally tended to lean either towards the Hamiltonian Federalist side or the Jeffersonian Democratic Republican side. And they were vicious and they were antagonistic, and they tended to focus on local matters. So if it was a New York newspaper, it tended to focus in on New York politics, New York issues. If it was in Boston, it would be taking a look at Boston issues, or Philadelphia, same kind of thing. And that makes sense, of course, because this was a far different society in terms of the ability to communicate. Communication was very, very slow. And so all that you could really do on a regular basis with any degree of accuracy is really look at local news for the most part. Now, as we start to get into, the early part of the 19th century, with the collapse of the Federalist Party and the rise of the era of good feelings, and even though that era of good feelings is a bit of a misnomer, and yeah, you're going to, create, competing political parties with the Democrats versus the Whigs, you're still going to see antebellum era newspapers that are not going to be nearly as antagonistic as what we saw initially. And in part it's because they're not as political as they used to be, and certainly not as political as they are today. A lot of antebellum era newspapers focused in on human interest stories, issues dealing with, articles focusing in on social issues and stuff like that, rather than, just the hard news of the actions of government. So it tended to be a little bit lighter, a little bit more reader-friendly in terms of, trying to not be antagonistic and just, shamelessly partisan. But of course, with new technology, changes how the media operates. And one of those advents will be the telegraph. And when the telegraph is formed, you now have the ability to send information nationally on a very, very, very rapid basis now. And so you can now start to promote, a national news kind of system. And that's going to start to happen with the Associated Press in 1844. And what the Associated Press is a newswire. It's basically taking information from various journalists from across the country and disseminating that across the country. And the idea behind it was to just provide basic information about the news across the country without regional preference, without partisan preference. And it does work to create a bit of a standardization of news that we didn't really have before. That, in other words, you could be in New York and getting the same news as somebody in Philadelphia that's getting the same news in Boston because of that information that is being sent via the telegraph. Now, note, a lot of the reporting by this point in time, is focusing in on very dry content. It's very, matter of fact in terms of here's what's going on. But of course that will change as well. As we get into the latter part of the 19th century, you saw the rise of yellow journalism, which was much more fixated on being sensationalist and bold headlines and dramatic stories. And, many of you, of course, know the power of yellow journalism as an impetus for the Spanish-American War, and, the use of cartoons and more pictures and appealing to an audience that may not have English as their first language. At the same time that is kind of happening, we're also seeing the rise of the impact of the muckrakers during the Progressive Era, which is at the very end of the 19th and very beginning of the 20th centuries. And, the idea being is that the news is not just simply to relay information, but to serve as a whistleblower for the problems of society. Knowing that the media is a connection to the government from the people, a linkage institution, then, the government must be aware of problems that exist. And we see, many of these important muckraking journalists from Tarbell to Sinclair to Reese and others that are, uncovering problems, be it, urban poverty, the unethical business practices of monopolies, to, the disgusting, practices of the meatpacking industry, leading to having an impact, opening the eyes of the public, and therefore putting pressure on government to do something about it. And that will lead to a lot of changes of the progressive era, be it, from the Clayton Antitrust Act to the, Pure Food and Drug Act, to many state and local laws to, mandate public education and zoning laws and all sorts of things. Now, as we get into modern media, of course, comes in many different forms. And, when we talk about newspapers, they are still around, though their impact has diminished significantly, I'd say, in the last 20 years. But still, though, there are still mainstays that are, ubiquitous in terms of American understanding of the news. And, the most renowned historically in terms of quality of news, quality of journalism, quality of reporting, is associated with, the New York Times, the Washington Post. The Washington Post, you may recall, was significant in uncovering the Watergate scandal. The New York Times was critical with the Pentagon Papers. Really good investigative journalism. You also have the Wall Street Journal, which is renowned for not just, economic news, but political news as well. Now, be aware, of course, that, most media today has some sort of a lean to it, and newspapers are no different. So, and I should say print media, is no different. There are, magazines such as The Nation and The New Republic, which tend to lean more to the left, progressive wing of Americans. And then you have more conservative leaning, magazines like the National Review or the newspaper, the Washington Times, that leans more to the right. So, be mindful that, there is this sense, especially in the last 50, 60 years, of newspapers kind of moving more and more, to the left and to the right. And that's, when we talk about the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, that's not to say that they don't have leans as well. The New York Times and the Post, are seen as a little bit more to the left, and the Wall Street Journal is a little bit more to the right. But we kind of put those three in a special category because they are so renowned in terms of the quality of journalism historically that, that supersedes the leans that they may have a little bit. So, anyhow, a little introduction into the media and a little bit of history of the traditional media. We'll take a look at some other examples, other, modes of modern media next time. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.